Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell had spent 12 years building an impeccable military career when a single decision during a classified operation in Syria would strip away everything she had worked for. What she didn't know was that 3 years later, her former unit would face annihilation, and she would be the only person alive with the skills to save them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly beyond the perimeter of Nellis Air Force Base as Sarah Mitchell completed her final equipment check. At 0445 hours, the pre-dawn darkness provided perfect cover for the specialized training operation she had designed for her elite reconnaissance unit, the 75th Intelligence Squadron. Sarah had earned her position as the youngest female lieutenant colonel in the unit's history, through a combination of tactical brilliance, unwavering dedication, and an almost supernatural ability to predict enemy movements in hostile territory. Her specialty was electronic warfare and signals intelligence, skills that had made her invaluable during the most sensitive operations across 3 different theaters of war. The soldiers under her command weren't just any military personnel. They were the military's most advanced cyber warfare specialists, trained to infiltrate enemy communication networks and gather intelligence that traditional methods couldn't access. Sarah had handpicked each member of her team, molding them into the most effective digital reconnaissance unit in the armed forces. The morning briefing took place in a windowless bunker 30 feet below the Nevada sand, where classified operations were planned away from satellite surveillance and electronic eavesdropping. Sarah stood before her team of 16 specialists, each one representing years of training and millions of dollars in specialized education. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were mathematicians, computer scientists, and linguists who had volunteered for military service and discovered they had a talent for warfare in the digital age. Today's exercise simulates a hostile electronic environment where traditional communication methods have been compromised, Sarah explained, pointing to a complex diagram on the secure display screen. Your mission is to establish secure communication networks using equipment that hasn't been field-tested and protocols that exist only in theory. The enemy will be represented by the Navy's best cyber warfare unit, and they've been given 3 weeks to prepare countermeasures against our approach. Staff Sergeant David Chen, her senior communications specialist, raised his hand with a question that demonstrated the intellectual caliber of her team. Colonel, if we're testing theoretical protocols against prepared defenses, what's our success metric? Traditional military exercises measure territorial objectives, but this seems designed to test adaptability rather than predetermined outcomes. Sarah smiled at the question, recognizing the analytical thinking that made Chen invaluable during real operations. Excellent point, Sergeant. Success isn't measured by accomplishing a predetermined objective. It's measured by your ability to maintain operational effectiveness when everything you've trained for stops working. In real combat, the enemy doesn't follow our exercise protocols. The Nevada training range provided 12,000 square miles of realistic terrain where military units could conduct full-scale exercises without civilian interference. Sarah's unit would be operating in mountainous desert conditions that closely resembled the regions where they might face actual deployment. The exercise was designed to last 72 hours, during which her team would establish forward operating positions while maintaining electronic communication networks under constant attack from simulated enemy forces. What made Sarah exceptional wasn't just her technical expertise, but her ability to think like both a soldier and a scientist. She understood that future warfare would be fought as much in cyberspace as on traditional battlefields. And she had dedicated her career to preparing her soldiers for conflicts that most military leaders couldn't even imagine. Her personnel files contained commendations from operations across 4 continents, where her electronic warfare expertise had provided crucial advantages in situations where conventional military tactics had failed. The relationship between Sarah and her team went beyond typical military hierarchy. These soldiers had followed her through operations in Somalia, where she had disrupted enemy communications during a hostage rescue mission. They had served with her in Eastern Europe, where her cyber warfare techniques had provided early warning of insurgent activities that saved dozens of American lives. They trusted her judgment because she had consistently demonstrated the ability to keep them alive in situations where technology was their only advantage. As the exercise commenced, Sarah's team dispersed across the Nevada landscape, establishing hidden positions where they could operate their equipment without detection. The electronic warfare systems they carried represented the cutting edge of military technology. Devices that could intercept enemy communications, disrupt hostile radar systems, and create false electronic signatures that would confuse enemy targeting systems. Sarah had spent months training her team to use this equipment in conditions where traditional support networks would be unavailable. The first phase of the exercise proceeded exactly as Sarah had predicted. The Navy's cyber warfare unit attempted to locate her team using conventional electronic surveillance methods, but Sarah's soldiers had established their positions using terrain features that provided natural electromagnetic shielding. Their communication networks remained operational, while the opposing force struggled to even detect their presence. By the second day, Sarah's team had not only maintained their communication networks, but had successfully infiltrated the Navy unit's command systems, providing her with real-time intelligence about their opponent's strategies and capabilities. It was the kind of tactical advantage that could determine the outcome of real combat operations, and it demonstrated why Sarah's unit was considered essential to national security. The exercise took an unexpected turn when Sarah's monitoring equipment detected electronic signatures that weren't part of the training scenario. Unknown aircraft were operating in restricted airspace above the exercise area, using radar frequencies that didn't match any American military systems. The signatures suggested foreign surveillance aircraft conducting intelligence-gathering operations against the exercise, taking advantage of the concentrated presence of advanced American electronic warfare systems. Sarah faced a decision that would define her career and destroy her future. Military exercise protocols required her to report the unauthorized aircraft through official channels and continue the training mission without deviation. But her analysis of the electronic signatures indicated that foreign intelligence services were actively gathering information about America's most advanced cyber warfare capabilities. Every minute the exercise continued provided potential enemies with intelligence that could compromise future operations and endanger American lives. The unauthorized aircraft were positioned to monitor not just the exercise, but the specific frequencies, encryption methods, and tactical approaches that represented years of classified research and development. Sarah realized that continuing the exercise under surveillance would essentially hand over American military secrets to foreign intelligence services. But terminating the exercise without authorization would mean disobeying direct orders and potentially ending her military career. Her team was looking to her for guidance, trusting her judgment as they had during real combat operations. These soldiers had followed her through dangerous missions because they believed in her ability to make the right decisions under pressure. Now she faced a choice between following military protocol and protecting national security, knowing that either decision could have consequences that extended far beyond the Nevada desert. Sarah made the decision that felt right to a soldier who had spent 12 years putting mission success above personal advancement. She terminated the exercise, ordered her team to shut down all electronic systems, and reported the unauthorized aircraft through emergency channels that bypassed normal military hierarchy. Her actions protected classified information from foreign intelligence gathering, but they also violated direct orders and disrupted a major training operation that had taken months to coordinate. The investigation that followed would examine every aspect of her decision, questioning her judgment, her loyalty, and her understanding of military discipline. Sarah had chosen to protect American secrets over following orders, not knowing that this choice would lead to her destruction and, ultimately, to her redemption. The formal hearing convened at Peterson Space Force Base 3 weeks after Sarah had terminated the Nevada exercise. The sterile conference room felt like a courtroom, with 5 senior officers seated behind a polished oak table that seemed designed to intimidate rather than facilitate justice. Sarah sat alone at a smaller table, her military-appointed defense attorney, having made it clear that her case was essentially hopeless, given the political pressures surrounding the incident. Brigadier General Robert Kane presided over the proceedings with the mechanical precision of someone who had already decided the outcome. The charges against Sarah were comprehensive and devastating: willful disobedience of direct orders, unauthorized termination of a classified military exercise, breach of operational security protocols, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Each charge carried the potential for court-martial, but the military had chosen administrative action to avoid the public scrutiny that a formal trial would generate. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, General Kane began, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. "You stand accused of actions that fundamentally undermine military discipline and operational effectiveness. Do you understand the gravity of these proceedings?" Sarah maintained her military bearing despite knowing that her career was already over. "Yes, sir. I understand completely." The prosecution's case was presented by Colonel Janet Roberts, a staff officer whose career had been built on strict adherence to regulations rather than operational experience. Roberts painted a picture of an officer who had allowed personal judgment to override military discipline, creating a dangerous precedent that could undermine the entire command structure. "Members of the review board," Colonel Roberts announced, "Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's actions during Exercise Desert Phoenix represent a fundamental failure to understand military hierarchy and operational priorities. When faced with a situation that required adherence to established protocols, she chose to substitute her personal judgment for the collective wisdom of military leadership." The classified nature of the exercise meant that most details couldn't be discussed in open proceedings, leaving Sarah unable to present her reasoning for protecting American intelligence capabilities from foreign surveillance. The review board heard only that she had terminated an authorized exercise without permission, disrupting months of planning and wasting millions of dollars in allocated resources. Sarah's defense attorney, Major Kevin Walsh, attempted to argue that her actions had been motivated by legitimate security concerns, but the classified nature of the intelligence she had protected meant that he couldn't present the evidence that would justify her decision. The system was designed to protect national secrets, but in this case, those same protections prevented Sarah from defending herself against charges that threatened to destroy her career. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The most damaging testimony came from Colonel Thomas Bradley, the officer who had designed Exercise Desert Phoenix and had spent 8 months coordinating the resources and personnel required for its execution. Bradley testified that Sarah's actions had compromised relationships with Allied military units, damaged the reputation of American military professionalism, and created doubt about the reliability of joint training operations. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's decision to terminate the exercise based on her personal assessment of an undefined threat demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of military decision-making, Bradley testified. Military operations require trust in the chain of command and adherence to established protocols. When individual officers substitute their judgment for institutional authority, the entire system breaks down. What Bradley didn't mention was that the foreign surveillance aircraft Sarah had detected had successfully gathered intelligence that would later be used against American forces in actual combat operations. The classified assessment of the incident, which the review board was not authorized to access, confirmed that Sarah's decision had prevented a significant intelligence breach that could have compromised ongoing operations across multiple theaters. Sarah's own testimony was limited by the classified restrictions that prevented her from discussing the technical details of what she had discovered. She could only speak in general terms about her responsibility to protect American intelligence capabilities, knowing that the review board would interpret her vague explanations as an attempt to justify insubordination rather than understanding the specific threat she had identified. "Members of the board," Sarah testified, "my primary responsibility as a military officer is to protect American lives and national security interests. When I detected evidence of hostile intelligence gathering during the exercise, I made the decision that would minimize the compromise of classified capabilities. I understand that this decision violated exercise protocols, but I believed then and I believe now that it was the correct choice for protecting American interests." The review board's questions focused on military discipline rather than operational effectiveness. They wanted to know why she hadn't followed the established chain of command, why she had trusted her personal judgment over institutional protocols, and whether she understood that military effectiveness required absolute adherence to orders, regardless of personal opinions about their wisdom. Sarah answered each question honestly, explaining her reasoning while knowing that her explanations would be interpreted as evidence of poor judgment rather than tactical expertise. The system was designed to value compliance over competence, and her decision to prioritize mission effectiveness over administrative convenience had marked her as unreliable within the institutional framework. The deliberation lasted less than 2 hours. When the review board returned, General Kane's expression revealed the outcome before he spoke a single word. Sarah stood at attention, maintaining her military composure as her career died around her. "Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell," General Kane announced, This board finds you guilty of willful disobedience of direct orders and conduct unbecoming an officer. You are hereby sentenced to reduction in rank to captain, forfeiture of all pension benefits, and dishonorable discharge from the United States Air Force, effective immediately." The words echoed in the sterile conference room like gunshots. 12 years of dedicated service, multiple commendations for exceptional performance, and the respect of every soldier who had served under her command, all erased with a single administrative decision. Sarah maintained her military bearing as the formal procedures of her destruction continued, but inside, something fundamental broke that would never fully heal. The ceremony of rank reduction took place the following morning in front of assembled personnel who had worked with Sarah during her years at Peterson Space Force Base. She stood at attention as her lieutenant colonel insignia was removed, her ribbons and commendations stripped away, and her military credentials formally revoked. The symbolism was brutal and deliberate, a public humiliation designed to demonstrate the consequences of challenging institutional authority. Colonel Bradley, who had testified against her during the hearing, watched the ceremony with obvious satisfaction. The officer who had built his career on administrative competence, rather than operational excellence, had successfully eliminated someone whose tactical expertise made his own limitations obvious. Sarah's destruction served multiple purposes. It reinforced institutional discipline while removing an officer whose independent thinking challenged established protocols. As Sarah walked away from Peterson Space Force Base for the final time, carrying her personal belongings in a single duffel bag, she understood that her military life was over. The dishonorable discharge would follow her forever, marking her as unfit for positions of responsibility and closing doors that would never reopen. The woman who had once been trusted with America's most advanced cyber warfare capabilities was now considered unsuitable for any position requiring security clearance or leadership authority. But as she drove toward an uncertain civilian future, Sarah carried with her the absolute conviction that she had made the right decision. The foreign intelligence gathering she had prevented would have compromised American capabilities and endangered American lives. Someday, somehow, the truth about Exercise Desert Phoenix would emerge, and her sacrifice would be understood for what it really was: a choice to protect national security over personal advancement. The parking lot of Peterson Space Force Base disappeared in her rearview mirror, but Sarah knew that her connection to military service wasn't truly severed. The skills she had developed, the soldiers she had trained, and the principles she had defended would remain part of her identity regardless of her official status. The military had discharged her, but it hadn't broken her, and that distinction would prove crucial in the trials that lay ahead. 9 months after her discharge, Sarah Mitchell sat in her cramped studio apartment in Phoenix, Arizona, staring at another rejection email on her laptop screen. The technical writing position at a small software company had seemed promising. Her military experience with complex systems and documentation should have made her an ideal candidate. But the background check had revealed her dishonorable discharge, and the polite email explained that they had decided to pursue other candidates whose qualifications better aligned with company values. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same analytical skills that had made her invaluable to national security were apparently worthless in the civilian job market. Her expertise in cyber warfare, signals intelligence, and electronic systems meant nothing when potential employers saw only the scarlet letter of military disgrace. She had become a ghost haunting the edges of the technology industry, possessing advanced knowledge that no one would allow her to use. The apartment she now called home was a far cry from the officer quarters she had occupied at Peterson Space Force Base. Located in a neighborhood where police sirens were part of the nightly soundtrack, the building's thin walls provided no privacy from her neighbors' domestic disputes and late-night parties. The air conditioning worked sporadically during Phoenix's brutal summer months, and the heating system had failed completely during the previous winter, forcing her to bundle up in military surplus clothing that reminded her daily of what she had lost. Her savings from 12 years of military service were disappearing faster than she had anticipated. The dishonorable discharge had cost her not only her pension but also access to veterans' benefits, medical care, and job placement programs that might have eased her transition to civilian life. She was discovering that the safety net she had assumed would exist simply wasn't available to soldiers who had been branded as disciplinary failures, regardless of their actual service record or the circumstances of their discharge. The employment agency downtown had stopped returning her calls after the third month of failed placements. Sarah had applied for positions ranging from network security analyst to technical support representative, but the pattern was always the same. Initial interest based on her technical qualifications, followed by swift rejection once employers learned about her military discharge. The civilian world operated on the assumption that anyone discharged for misconduct must be fundamentally unreliable, regardless of the specific circumstances involved. Her most recent job had lasted exactly 1 week. She had been hired as a night shift security guard at a warehouse complex, one of the few positions that didn't require extensive background screening. The work was mind-numbing, walking patrol routes, monitoring camera feeds, and filing incident reports about minor property damage and suspicious activities. But it paid enough to cover her rent and provided health insurance, which had become her primary concern after discovering the cost of civilian medical care. The job had ended when her supervisor discovered her military background and became convinced that someone with her training represented a security risk. "Look, nothing personal," he had explained while escorting her to the parking lot, "but corporations don't want someone with your kind of discharge history having access to client facilities. Liability issues, you understand?" Sarah understood perfectly. Her expertise in electronic surveillance and security systems, skills that had once made her indispensable to military operations, now made her appear dangerous to civilian employers who imagined worst-case scenarios involving disgruntled former soldiers with advanced technical training. The very capabilities that had defined her professional identity had become barriers to finding any meaningful employment. The isolation was perhaps worse than the financial struggles. Sarah had spent 12 years surrounded by colleagues who shared her dedication to mission accomplishment and professional excellence. Her social life had revolved around military communities where relationships were built on mutual respect and shared sacrifice. In the civilian world, she found herself unable to connect with people whose concerns seemed trivial compared to the life and death decisions she had faced during military operations. Her attempts to maintain contact with former colleagues had gradually faded, as it became clear that association with a dishonorably discharged officer could damage their own careers. The military community that had once provided her with identity and belonging had essentially exiled her, treating her disgrace as contagious and her presence as an uncomfortable reminder of how quickly military careers could be destroyed. The local Veterans Center had initially seemed like a source of community and support, but Sarah quickly discovered that her discharge status made her unwelcome, even among other former soldiers. Veterans with honorable discharges viewed her with suspicion and judgment, assuming that anyone who had been kicked out of the military must have committed serious infractions that justified their punishment. She found herself lying about her service record to avoid the uncomfortable questions and hostile reactions that the truth inevitably provoked. Her days fell into a depressing routine of job applications, rejection emails, and long hours spent in coffee shops using their Wi-Fi to search employment websites that offered positions she was qualified for but couldn't obtain. She had memorized the locations of every library and fast food restaurant in Phoenix that offered free internet access, rotating between them to avoid appearing homeless or desperate to staff who might ask her to leave. The technical skills that had once made her exceptional were atrophying from disuse. Cyber warfare capabilities required constant practice and access to current technology, but Sarah couldn't afford the equipment necessary to maintain her expertise. She watched from a distance as the field she had helped pioneer continued evolving without her, knowing that each month of unemployment made her knowledge less relevant and her eventual return to technical work less likely. Her parents, who had been proud of her military career and devastated by her discharge, tried to provide emotional support while struggling to understand what had really happened. Sarah couldn't explain the classified details that would justify her actions, leaving them to wonder whether their daughter had really failed as badly as the official record suggested. Their weekly phone calls had become exercises in carefully avoiding topics that might trigger discussions about her future or her past. The physical deterioration was as noticeable as the professional decline. Without access to military fitness facilities and lacking the structure that had once organized her daily routine, Sarah found herself gaining weight and losing the conditioning that had been part of her identity since basic training. The discipline that had characterized every aspect of her military life seemed meaningless in a civilian world that didn't reward precision, dedication, or attention to detail. Late at night, alone in her apartment with nothing but rejection emails and unpaid bills for company, Sarah sometimes wondered if the review board had been right. Maybe her decision to terminate Exercise Desert Phoenix had been the product of arrogance rather than professional judgment. Maybe the institutional wisdom she had challenged really was superior to her individual assessment of the situation. The doubt was corrosive, eating away at the confidence that had once made her an exceptional officer. But even in her darkest moments, Sarah couldn't bring herself to regret the choice she had made. Somewhere in a classified file that she would never be allowed to see, there was evidence that her actions had prevented a significant intelligence breach. American soldiers were safer because she had chosen to protect operational capabilities rather than follow exercise protocols. That knowledge provided little comfort when she couldn't pay her electric bill, but it remained the foundation of her identity even when everything else had been stripped away. The city of Phoenix sprawled around her like a concrete desert, filled with opportunities that remained perpetually out of reach. Sarah had survived combat operations in hostile territories, but the civilian job market was proving to be a more implacable enemy than any she had faced during military service. Each day brought new rejections and smaller defeats, but also the stubborn determination that had carried her through 12 years of military challenges. She didn't know it yet, but her expertise would soon be needed again, and the skills that made her unemployable in the civilian world would make her indispensable to the soldiers who had once served under her command. 14 months after her discharge, Sarah was restocking inventory at an electronics retail store in Phoenix when the news broke across every television screen in the building. The morning of October 15th had started like any other, customers asking questions about smartphones and tablets, while Sarah tried to appear enthusiastic about products that represented a fraction of the technology she had once commanded. Then the emergency broadcasts began, and everything changed. Breaking news from Eastern Europe, announced the CNN correspondent, her voice carrying the urgency that marked genuine crisis coverage. American intelligence sources confirm that a specialized military unit has been captured during a classified operation in the disputed border region between Ukraine and Belarus. Initial reports suggest that 16 highly trained personnel are being held by an unknown militant group with suspected ties to Russian intelligence services. Sarah felt her blood turn cold as she recognized the operational profile being described. 16 personnel, specialized unit, electronic warfare capabilities. The description matched exactly the composition and mission parameters of the 75th Intelligence Squadron, her former unit, the soldiers she had trained and led through the most dangerous cyber warfare operations in American military history. The store's customers continued browsing smartphones and laptops, oblivious to the significance of the news report, but Sarah found herself unable to focus on anything except the television screens that surrounded her. The Pentagon was refusing to provide details about the captured unit's mission or identity, citing operational security concerns, but Sarah's insider knowledge filled in the gaps that official statements left blank. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Coffee shop on 5th Street, 1 hour, come alone. DS. Sarah stared at the message, her mind racing through possibilities. The initials DS meant nothing to her, but the timing couldn't be coincidental. Someone who knew about her background was reaching out precisely when her former unit faced destruction. Every instinct developed during 12 years of military service told her that this contact was connected to the crisis unfolding on the news. She finished her shift in a haze of anxiety and anticipation, mechanically helping customers, while her thoughts remained focused on the 16 soldiers who had once depended on her leadership. Staff Sergeant David Chen, who had asked insightful questions during training exercises. Technical Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, whose innovative approaches to signal interception had revolutionized their operational capabilities. 16 brilliant minds who had trusted her judgment and followed her into the most dangerous electronic battlefields in the world. The coffee shop on 5th Street was a small, independent establishment that attracted a mix of college students and local professionals. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early and selected a corner table that provided clear sightlines to all entrances, falling back on situational awareness habits that had never truly left her despite 14 months of civilian life. She ordered black coffee and waited, watching every person who entered while trying to appear like just another customer. Dr. Rebecca Stevens entered precisely on time, moving with the careful efficiency of someone accustomed to clandestine meetings. Sarah recognized her immediately, despite never having met her in person. Stevens was a legend in intelligence circles, a former NSA analyst who had blown the whistle on domestic surveillance overreach and subsequently disappeared into the shadow world of independent intelligence operations. Her presence confirmed that the situation was far more complex than news reports suggested. "Sarah Mitchell," Stevens said quietly as she sat down across from her. "Thank you for coming. I apologize for the cryptic message, but current circumstances require extreme discretion." Sarah studied the woman who had sacrificed her own career to expose government wrongdoing, recognizing a kindred spirit in someone who had chosen principles over institutional loyalty. "Dr. Stevens, I know your reputation. What does this have to do with the captured unit?" Stevens opened a tablet and showed Sarah satellite imagery that wasn't being broadcast on any news network. The images showed a heavily fortified compound in a remote forest region, surrounded by defensive positions that indicated serious military preparation rather than opportunistic kidnapping. The 75th Intelligence Squadron was conducting a classified operation to intercept communications from a Russian cyber warfare facility, Stevens explained in a voice barely above a whisper. They were betrayed by someone within their own command structure and walked into a trap that was designed specifically to capture them alive. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she studied the tactical situation depicted in the satellite images. The compound's defenses were positioned to repel rescue attempts, while maintaining the capability to move prisoners quickly if extraction operations were detected. Whoever had planned this capture understood American military tactics well enough to anticipate and counter conventional rescue approaches. "How do you know they were betrayed?" Sarah asked, though her experience with institutional corruption made the explanation unsurprising. Stevens slid another image across the table, showing communication intercepts and financial records that painted a picture of systematic intelligence leaks. "The same network that destroyed your career has been selling operational information to hostile intelligence services for over 2 years. Your former unit discovered evidence of these transactions during their previous missions, making them targets for elimination." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. The soldiers she had trained were being sacrificed not just to protect corrupt officials, but to eliminate witnesses who could expose a conspiracy that had compromised American intelligence operations across multiple theaters. Their capture wasn't random enemy action. It was a deliberate murder plot disguised as operational failure. "What about official rescue operations?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Stevens' expression grew grim. "The Pentagon is organizing a response, but it's being coordinated by the same people who arranged for your unit to be captured. General Patricia Donovan and Colonel Thomas Bradley are designing a rescue mission that's intended to fail, ensuring that all 16 soldiers die during the extraction attempt." Sarah recognized both names from her own destruction. Donovan had been one of the reviewing officers who had supported her discharge, while Bradley had been the primary architect of Exercise Desert Phoenix and had testified against her during the administrative hearing. The people who had destroyed her career were now planning to murder her former soldiers to protect their criminal activities. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked, though part of her already understood the implications. Stevens leaned forward across the small table. "Because you're the only person alive who knows those soldiers well enough to mount an effective rescue operation. You trained them, you understand their capabilities, and you know how they think under pressure. More importantly, you're outside official channels, which means you can operate without the corruption network knowing about your involvement." The weight of the situation settled on Sarah's shoulders like a familiar burden. 16 soldiers who had once trusted her leadership were facing execution by enemies who had been provided with classified information by their own government. The official rescue operation was designed to fail by the same people who had destroyed her career for trying to protect American intelligence capabilities. "What kind of resources are we talking about?" Sarah asked, her analytical mind already shifting into tactical planning mode despite the enormous risks involved. Stevens smiled for the first time since they had met. "More than you might expect. There are others like us, intelligence professionals who were pushed out for refusing to participate in corruption. We've been preparing for something like this, building capabilities outside official oversight." Sarah thought about the 16 soldiers who were depending on someone to save them, not knowing that their own government had condemned them to death. She thought about the skills she had developed over 12 years of military service, capabilities that were being wasted on retail work while soldiers died due to institutional betrayal. Most of all, she thought about the choice between safety and duty. the same decision that had destroyed her career but had also defined her character. "What do you need me to do?" Sarah asked, making the commitment that would either redeem her completely or result in her death in a foreign country. Stevens opened another file on her tablet, revealing detailed intelligence about the compound where Sarah's former unit was being held. "We need you to lead a rescue operation that the Pentagon doesn't know about, using resources they can't track against enemies who think they've eliminated all threats to their plans." As Sarah studied the tactical challenge that would determine whether 16 soldiers lived or died, she realized that her discharge had been preparation for this moment. The skills that made her unemployable in civilian life made her invaluable for an operation that existed outside official channels. For the first time in 14 months, she had a mission that matched her capabilities and her principles. The coffee shop around them continued its normal operations, customers discussing weekend plans and work projects, while two women planned an international rescue operation that would either expose a conspiracy or add more casualties to its body count. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded dangerous missions, the same focus that had carried her through combat operations when failure meant death for American soldiers. Her former unit was counting on someone to save them, even though they didn't know it yet. For the first time since her discharge, Sarah Mitchell had found her purpose again. 3 days after her meeting with Dr. Stevens, Sarah found herself in an abandoned aircraft hangar outside Tucson, Arizona, that had been converted into a sophisticated operations center by a network of intelligence professionals operating outside official oversight. The facility contained equipment that rivaled anything she had used during her military career: satellite communication systems, electronic warfare devices, and tactical planning tools that represented millions of dollars in specialized technology. "Welcome to Prometheus Station," said Marcus Torres, a former CIA operative who had been forced out of the agency for refusing to participate in illegal domestic surveillance operations. "We've been building this capability for 3 years, preparing for the day when American intelligence professionals would need to operate independently of corrupted official channels." Sarah surveyed the operations center with professional appreciation. The hangar had been divided into specialized work areas: intelligence analysis stations equipped with multiple monitors and secure communication links, a tactical planning section with detailed maps and satellite imagery, equipment storage areas containing military-grade gear, and living quarters that could support extended operations. It was exactly the kind of facility that would be needed to mount a complex rescue operation without government resources or oversight. The team that Stevens had assembled represented the cream of American intelligence capabilities, professionals who had been pushed out of official positions for refusing to compromise their principles. Dr. James Chen, a former NSA cryptographer who had been blacklisted for exposing security vulnerabilities in government systems. Captain Lisa Park, a former Army Special Forces officer who had been forced to resign after reporting war crimes committed by her commanding officer. Technical Sergeant Mike Davis, a former Air Force cyber warfare specialist who had been discharged for refusing to participate in illegal hacking operations against American citizens. "Each of us has been destroyed by the same corruption network that captured your unit," Stevens explained as she introduced Sarah to the team. "We've spent years gathering evidence and building capabilities, waiting for an opportunity to strike back against the people who perverted American intelligence services for personal profit." The intelligence briefing that followed revealed the true scope of the conspiracy that had destroyed Sarah's career and now threatened her former soldiers. General Patricia Donovan and Colonel Thomas Bradley were part of a network that had been selling classified information to Russian intelligence services for over 4 years, compromising dozens of operations and causing hundreds of American casualties across multiple theaters of war. The 75th Intelligence Squadron discovered financial records during their previous mission that proved the intelligence leaks, Dr. Chen explained, pointing to data streams on his multiple monitors. They were scheduled to present evidence to internal affairs investigators next week, which is why the corruption network arranged for their capture and planned elimination. Sarah studied the satellite imagery of the compound where her soldiers were being held, analyzing defensive positions and approach routes with the tactical expertise that had made her invaluable during military operations. The facility was a former Soviet research station that had been modified with modern security systems and defensive fortifications. Its remote location in the Belarusian forest provided natural isolation while offering multiple escape routes for the captors if rescue operations were detected. "The compound's electronic defenses are the real challenge," Captain Park observed, highlighting detection systems that surrounded the facility. Conventional military approaches would be detected long before rescue teams could reach the prisoners. We need someone who understands electronic warfare well enough to neutralize their surveillance systems without triggering automated alerts. Sarah felt the familiar surge of anticipation that preceded complex technical challenges. The defensive systems protecting the compound represented exactly the kind of electronic warfare problem that she had spent 12 years learning to solve. Her expertise in signals intelligence and cyber warfare made her uniquely qualified to penetrate defenses that would stop conventional military units. "What kind of timeline are we working with?" Sarah asked, already beginning to formulate tactical approaches that could overcome the compound's defensive advantages. Stevens consulted her intelligence summaries. Russian handlers are planning to move the prisoners to a more secure facility in 48 hours. Once they're transferred, they'll disappear into the Russian intelligence system and we'll never be able to locate them again. The time constraint added urgency to an already complex operational challenge. Sarah would need to plan and execute a rescue operation in less than 2 days, operating in foreign territory without official support against enemies who had been preparing for exactly this kind of intervention. The margin for error was essentially zero. Any mistake would result in the death of 16 soldiers and the permanent exposure of everyone involved in the rescue attempt. "What assets do we have available?" Sarah asked, shifting into the analytical mode that had made her an exceptional military planner. Torres opened a secure laptop that displayed an inventory of equipment and resources that Prometheus Station had accumulated over 3 years of preparation. Private aircraft capable of undetected border crossings, electronic warfare equipment that matched military specifications, communication systems that operated outside government monitoring, and tactical gear that would support small unit operations in hostile territory. "We also have human resources," Stevens added, indicating profiles of international contacts who could provide support services, former intelligence professionals from allied nations who share our commitment to stopping corruption and protecting operatives who've been betrayed by their own governments. Sarah spent the next 6 hours immersed in tactical planning, applying the analytical skills that had once made her indispensable to American military operations. The rescue operation would require precise coordination of electronic warfare, physical infiltration, and extraction procedures that pushed the boundaries of what was possible, with limited resources and no official support. The breakthrough came when Dr. Chen identified a vulnerability in the compound's communication systems that Sarah could exploit using techniques she had developed during her military career. The facility's electronic defenses were designed to detect conventional military signals, but they had weaknesses that could be exploited by someone who understood both the technology involved and the tactical thinking behind its deployment. "If we can create a false electronic signature that mimics routine maintenance communications, we can mask our approach until we're close enough to neutralize their detection systems," Sarah explained, outlining a plan that combined her electronic warfare expertise with the team's operational capabilities. The plan that emerged from their collaboration was audacious and dangerous, requiring split-second timing and flawless execution across multiple phases. Sarah would lead a small team to penetrate the compound's electronic defenses, while Captain Park coordinated the physical extraction of the prisoners. Dr. Chen would provide technical support from Prometheus Station, monitoring communications and providing real-time intelligence about enemy responses to their operation. "This is a one-way mission for everyone involved," Stevens warned as they finalized the operational details. "If anything goes wrong, the government will deny any knowledge of our existence, and the corruption network will eliminate everyone who participated in the rescue attempt." Sarah looked around the operations center at professionals who had sacrificed their careers to fight corruption and protect American interests, understanding that they were all betting their lives on her ability to lead a mission that existed outside any official authorization. These people had chosen to trust her judgment despite her dishonorable discharge, believing that her tactical expertise was more important than her official reputation. "My soldiers have been counting on someone to save them for the past 3 days," Sarah replied. "Tomorrow night, they're going to find out that someone is coming." The final preparations took place throughout the following day, as team members tested equipment, reviewed contingency plans, and prepared for an operation that would either validate their years of preparation or result in their destruction. Sarah felt the familiar pre-mission focus that had characterized her military career, the heightened awareness and tactical clarity that came with accepting responsibility for life and death decisions. As evening approached, she stood outside the aircraft hangar looking toward the eastern horizon where her former soldiers were waiting for a rescue they didn't know was coming. In 12 hours, she would either be leading them to freedom or dying alongside them in a foreign forest. The skills that had made her unemployable in civilian life were about to determine whether 16 of America's best soldiers lived or died. For the first time since her discharge, Sarah Mitchell felt like the officer she had always been meant to be. The mountains of Eastern Europe were calling, and she was ready to answer with everything she had learned during 14 months of exile and 12 years of military service. Her soldiers were counting on her, and she would not let them down again. At 0200 hours on October 18th, Sarah Mitchell crouched in the dense Belarusian forest 2 kilometers from the compound where her former soldiers were being held captive. The October air was sharp with the promise of early winter, and frost covered the fallen leaves that crunched softly beneath her tactical boots. Through her night vision goggles, she could see the compound's perimeter lights creating an artificial dawn in the darkness that surrounded the former Soviet research facility. The insertion had gone flawlessly. Marcus Torres had piloted a modified civilian aircraft across 3 international borders, using flight paths that avoided radar coverage, landing on an abandoned airstrip that Dr. Chen had identified through satellite reconnaissance. Sarah's team, consisting of herself, Captain Lisa Park, and Technical Sergeant Mike Davis, had parachuted into the forest under cover of darkness, while Torres continued the flight to establish a false trail that would mislead any investigation into their presence. "Overwatch, this is Rescue 1, Sarah whispered into her encrypted communication device. "We have eyes on the target. Compound appears to match intelligence reports exactly." Dr. Chen's voice crackled through her earpiece from Prometheus Station, 3,000 miles away in Arizona. "Copy, Rescue 1. Satellite imagery shows 16 heat signatures in the main detention facility. No change in guard rotations or external security posture." Sarah studied the compound through her tactical scope, mentally cataloging defensive positions and identifying the electronic warfare systems that protected the facility from conventional military approaches. The Soviet-era buildings had been modernized with advanced surveillance equipment, but the underlying architecture still reflected the paranoid security thinking of the Cold War era. Multiple layers of fencing surrounded concrete structures that had been designed to withstand direct assault rather than subtle infiltration. Phase 1 commencing, Sarah announced as she activated the electronic warfare device that represented 18 months of planning and preparation. The system she carried was a masterpiece of miniaturized technology, capable of generating false signals that would convince the compound's detection systems that routine maintenance operations were taking place rather than hostile infiltration. The device hummed quietly as it began transmitting the carefully crafted electronic signatures that Dr. Chen had designed to exploit vulnerabilities in Russian surveillance systems. Sarah watched her portable scanner as the compound's defensive network gradually accepted their false maintenance signals, creating a 15-minute window during which her team could approach without triggering automated alarms. "Security systems neutralized," she whispered to Captain Park, who was positioned 300 meters to the south with responsibility for covering their extraction route. Beginning approach to primary target. Sarah and Sergeant Davis moved through the forest with the silent efficiency of professionals who had spent years perfecting the art of tactical movement. Every step was calculated to avoid detection by the human guards who patrolled the compound's perimeter, while Sarah's electronic warfare system continued broadcasting signals that masked their thermal signatures from the facility's automated surveillance systems. The first major obstacle was the outer fence, a double layer of razor wire topped with motion sensors that would detect any conventional breach attempt. Sarah attached a specialized device to the fence line that generated a localized electromagnetic pulse, temporarily disabling the sensors while creating a gap in the wire that was large enough for infiltration but small enough to avoid visual detection by guards. "Perimeter breached," she reported to Dr. Chen, proceeding to the detention facility. The main compound consisted of 5 concrete buildings arranged around a central courtyard that provided clear fields of fire for defensive positions. Sarah's intelligence indicated that the American prisoners were being held in Building 3, a structure that had originally served as a laboratory, but had been converted into a maximum security detention facility with reinforced cells and independent life support systems. As they approached Building 3, Sarah spotted two guards smoking cigarettes near the main entrance, their automatic weapons slung casually across their shoulders in the relaxed posture of soldiers who didn't expect trouble. These weren't elite special forces operators. They were hired contractors whose primary qualification was loyalty to whoever paid their salaries, rather than tactical expertise or military discipline. Sarah signaled Davis to circle around to the building's rear entrance while she prepared to neutralize the guards using techniques that would avoid raising alarms or alerting other security personnel. The specialized equipment she carried included non-lethal weapons that could incapacitate targets without creating the noise or obvious casualties that would trigger facility-wide alerts. The guards collapsed silently as Sarah's electromagnetic pulse device disrupted their nervous systems temporarily, leaving them unconscious but alive. Military ethics required minimizing casualties even during unauthorized operations, and Sarah had no intention of becoming the kind of person who killed unnecessarily to accomplish mission objectives. Guards neutralized. Entering primary structure, she whispered, as she picked the electronic lock that secured Building 3's main entrance. Inside the facility was a maze of corridors lined with heavy steel doors that had been designed to contain dangerous experiments rather than human prisoners. Sarah's heat signature scanner indicated that the American soldiers were being held in a cluster of cells on the building's second floor, approximately 50 meters from her current position through corridors that might contain additional security measures. The sound of familiar voices drifted down the stairwell as Sarah climbed toward the detention area. Even through the steel doors and concrete walls, she could recognize the disciplined tones of soldiers maintaining morale under extreme pressure. Staff Sergeant David Chen was giving what sounded like a technical briefing to his fellow prisoners, keeping their minds focused on professional subjects rather than their desperate circumstances. "Chen, Rodriguez, all of you," Sarah called softly as she reached the detention level. "This is Colonel Mitchell. I'm here to get you out." The response was immediate and overwhelming. 16 voices began talking at once, as soldiers who had given up hope of rescue realized that their former commanding officer had somehow found them in a remote Belarusian forest. The reunion would have to wait. Their captors would discover the unconscious guards within minutes, and the facility's automated systems would detect Sarah's presence as soon as her electronic warfare device stopped transmitting false maintenance signals. "Listen carefully," Sarah announced as she began using specialized tools to open the electronic locks that secured their cells. "We have approximately 10 minutes before this facility goes into lockdown mode. Follow my instructions exactly, maintain noise discipline, and trust that I know how to get you out of here." The soldiers who emerged from their cells were in remarkably good condition considering their 3 days of captivity. The Russians had apparently kept them healthy for interrogation purposes rather than subjecting them to physical abuse. Sarah felt a surge of pride as she watched her former team automatically fall into tactical formation despite their circumstances, demonstrating the discipline and training that had made them America's most effective cyber warfare unit. "Colonel," Staff Sergeant Chen said quietly as they prepared to move toward the extraction point, "how did you find us?" "Official channels told us that no rescue operation was authorized." Sarah checked her chronometer and calculated the time remaining before compound security would discover their escape. "Official channels are compromised, Sergeant. This operation exists outside normal authorization because the people who captured you are working with corrupt officials in our own government." The revelation that their capture had been arranged by American officers hit the team like a physical blow, but they processed the information with the analytical thinking that had made them exceptional intelligence specialists. These soldiers understood institutional corruption well enough to accept that their own commanders might betray them for financial gain or political advantage. "Movement in the courtyard," Sergeant Davis reported through the communication system. "Guards are conducting routine patrol. We need to move now if we're going to reach the extraction point." Quote, Sarah led her 16 former soldiers through the compound using routes that avoided fixed defensive positions while maintaining the electronic camouflage that prevented automated detection systems from identifying their movement. The escape was a masterpiece of tactical coordination, with each team member instinctively falling back into the roles they had practiced during countless training exercises under Sarah's leadership. The outer perimeter fence presented the final major obstacle. Sarah's electronic warfare device was running low on power, and the false maintenance signals that had protected them during infiltration would soon fail, exposing their presence to the compound's full defensive capabilities. They had perhaps 5 minutes to clear the facility before alarms sounded and pursuit began. "Overwatch, this is Rescue 1," Sarah whispered as her team prepared to breach the perimeter. "Package secured. 17 personnel, ready for extraction." Captain Park's voice came through their communication system with obvious relief. "The extraction point is clear. Proceed to designated coordinates for immediate pickup." As Sarah led her soldiers through the gap in the perimeter fence, she heard the distant sound of aircraft engines approaching from the east. Marcus Torres was returning with the extraction aircraft, flying without lights through Belarusian airspace using navigation skills that had been honed during decades of covert operations. In 15 minutes, they would be airborne and heading toward international waters where official protection could be arranged. But the compound's alarm system chose that moment to detect the failure of Sarah's electronic warfare device. Sirens began wailing across the facility as automated systems registered the presence of unauthorized personnel and initiated lockdown procedures. Searchlights swept the forest as guard units mobilized to prevent the escape of prisoners whose interrogation represented millions of dollars in intelligence value to Russian services. "Contact rear," Sergeant Davis reported as muzzle flashes appeared behind them. "Enemy forces in pursuit. Estimate 12 hostiles with automatic weapons." Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied combat operations as she transitioned from rescue mission to fighting withdrawal. Her 16 soldiers were safe, but they still had to reach the extraction point while under fire from enemies who had every advantage except the tactical expertise that Sarah had spent 12 years developing. The forest that had provided concealment during infiltration now became a battlefield where American cyber warfare specialists would prove that their training extended far beyond computer keyboards and electronic systems. Her phone rang with a call from Staff Sergeant David Chen, who had been promoted to Master Sergeant and assigned to her intelligence analysis section, where his expertise in cyber warfare and signals intelligence contributed to investigations that prevented additional betrayals and protected American operations from foreign intelligence penetration. "Colonel, we've received reports of suspicious financial activity involving procurement contracts in the Pacific Theater, with communication patterns that match the methodologies used by the network we exposed in Belarus," Chen reported, his voice carrying the professional competence that had made him invaluable during their years of service together. "Initial analysis suggests we might have identified another corruption network that needs immediate investigation before they can eliminate potential witnesses or complete planned operations." Part 7. The Vindication. 18 hours after the successful extraction from Belarus, Sarah Mitchell stood in a secure briefing room at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, facing a panel of officials whose presence indicated that her unauthorized rescue operation had triggered the highest levels of government attention. The room contained representatives from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Director of National Intelligence, and congressional oversight committees, who had been hastily assembled to address a crisis that threatened to expose the largest intelligence corruption scandal in American history. The journey from the Belarusian forest to this moment had been a blur of diplomatic negotiations, secure communications, and careful coordination between officials who were learning for the first time that a network of corrupt military officers had been systematically betraying American operations for financial gain. Sarah's 16 rescued soldiers were undergoing debriefing at a separate facility, providing testimony that would validate everything she had claimed about institutional corruption and foreign intelligence penetration. The international implications of her operation had created diplomatic tensions that extended far beyond military channels. The Belarusian government was demanding explanations for the unauthorized incursion into their territory, while Russian officials were claiming that American forces had violated international law during what they characterized as a terrorist operation. Secretary of State William Harper had spent the past 12 hours conducting emergency consultations with allied governments to prevent the rescue mission from escalating into a broader diplomatic crisis. Sarah's extraction aircraft had been intercepted by NATO fighters over Polish airspace, forcing an emergency landing at a military facility where her identity and mission had to be verified through encrypted channels that bypassed potentially compromised communication networks. The Polish government had agreed to provide temporary sanctuary, while American officials determined how to handle an operation that technically constituted an act of war against a sovereign nation, even though it had been conducted to rescue American personnel who had been illegally captured. The media storm surrounding the rescue had begun within hours of their arrival in Germany, as news outlets struggled to understand how a dishonorably discharged officer had conducted a successful international rescue operation, while official channels remained silent about the fate of captured American soldiers. CNN, Fox News, and international broadcasters were running continuous coverage of what they were calling the Belarus incident, demanding explanations from Pentagon officials who were still learning the details of Sarah's operation. Dr. Rebecca Stevens had spent the flight to Germany preparing comprehensive briefing materials that documented the full scope of the corruption network's activities, including financial records that traced payments from Russian intelligence accounts to over 30 American military officers across multiple branches of service. The evidence revealed a systematic betrayal that had compromised operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Eastern Europe, resulting in casualties that had been attributed to operational failures rather than deliberate sabotage. The secure briefing room at Ramstein had been hastily configured with the most advanced communication equipment available, allowing real-time consultation with officials in Washington, London, and other allied capitals who were grappling with the implications of Sarah's discoveries. Large display screens showed satellite imagery of the Belarusian compound, communication intercepts that documented the coordination between corrupt American officers and Russian handlers, and financial analyses that revealed the true scope of the intelligence leaks that had endangered American lives across multiple theaters of operation. Colonel Mitchell began Admiral James Harrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, using her former rank rather than acknowledging her dishonorable discharge. What you accomplished in Belarus represents either the most significant unauthorized military operation in modern history or the most important intelligence rescue mission of the past decade. Help us understand which interpretation is correct. The weight of the Admiral's question hung in the air as Sarah processed the magnitude of the moment. Around the table sat officials whose decisions would determine not only her fate, but also the future of American intelligence operations, and the prosecution of the largest treason conspiracy in decades. CIA Director Margaret Chen observed the proceedings with the analytical intensity of someone who understood that the agency's credibility depended on how this crisis was resolved. FBI Director Robert Martinez had already begun coordinating with international law enforcement agencies to track financial networks that extended beyond American borders. Defense Secretary Thomas Rodriguez had arrived from Washington on a military transport aircraft, bringing with him classified assessments of the operational damage caused by the corruption network's activities. His preliminary reports indicated that the intelligence leaks had compromised not just individual missions, but entire strategic approaches to cyber warfare, electronic intelligence gathering, and signals analysis that represented decades of technological development and billions of dollars in research investment. The rescued soldiers from the 75th Intelligence Squadron were providing testimony that validated the most disturbing aspects of Sarah's allegations about institutional betrayal. Staff Sergeant David Chen had personally witnessed Colonel Thomas Bradley receiving encrypted communications from unknown sources that contained operational details about upcoming missions. Technical Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had discovered financial irregularities in equipment procurement that suggested systematic diversion of resources to unauthorized recipients. Each piece of testimony corroborated Sarah's claims about corruption that extended far beyond individual misconduct into systematic treason. Sarah had spent the flight from Eastern Europe preparing for this moment, knowing that her words would determine not only her own fate, but also the future of intelligence reform and the prosecution of corrupt officials who had betrayed American interests. The evidence she had gathered during a rescue operation provided proof of treason that extended far beyond the capture of her former unit, revealing a network of corruption that had been systematically undermining American national security for years. The room's atmosphere was electric with tension as Sarah activated the secure presentation system that would display evidence gathered by Prometheus Station over years of independent investigation. The first slide showed a network analysis diagram that mapped connections between corrupt American officers, Russian intelligence operatives, and defense contractors who had profited from the systematic failure of American military operations. The complexity of the network was staggering, involving over 50 individuals across multiple agencies and defense contractors who had coordinated their activities to maximize both intelligence value and financial profit. Admiral, the 75th Intelligence Squadron was deliberately betrayed by officials within their own command structure who have been selling classified information to Russian intelligence services for over 4 years, Sarah began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had risked everything to expose the truth. Their capture was arranged to prevent them from presenting evidence of systematic corruption that has compromised dozens of operations and caused hundreds of American casualties across multiple theaters of war. The second slide displayed communication intercepts that showed direct coordination between General Patricia Donovan and Russian intelligence handlers, including specific instructions about which operations to sabotage and which personnel to target for elimination. The messages revealed a level of tactical coordination between American officers and foreign intelligence services that amounted to active participation in warfare against their own country. Congressional Representative Jennifer Walsh, who served on the House Intelligence Committee, studied the communication intercepts with growing horror as she realized that American military personnel had been providing targeting information that directly resulted in attacks against their own forces. Colonel Mitchell, these communications suggest that American officers were actively participating in planning attacks against American soldiers. How long has this network been operational? Sarah advanced to financial records that trace the corruption network's activities back to 2019, showing systematic payments that coincided with major intelligence failures and operational compromises across multiple theaters. Representative Walsh, our analysis indicates that this network has been operational for at least 5 years, with activities escalating significantly after they realized that traditional oversight mechanisms could be subverted through careful placement of corrupt officials in key positions. Director of National Intelligence Catherine Walsh leaned forward with obvious intensity, her expression reflecting the professional devastation of someone who had dedicated her career to protecting American intelligence capabilities. Colonel, you're alleging that American military officers conspired with foreign intelligence services to arrange the capture of their own soldiers. Do you understand the implications of these accusations for our relationships with allied intelligence services who trusted our operational security? Sarah opened the secure laptop that contained evidence gathered by Prometheus Station over 3 years of independent investigation, displaying financial transactions, communication intercepts, and operational analyses that painted a comprehensive picture of betrayal extending across multiple agencies and defense contractors. The evidence revealed not just individual corruption, but systematic institutional failure that had allowed foreign intelligence services to penetrate American military operations at the highest levels. Ma'am, I'm not making allegations. I'm presenting documented evidence of treason, Sarah replied, displaying financial transactions that showed systematic payments from Russian intelligence accounts to American military officers totaling over $18 million across a 4-year period. General Patricia Donovan and Colonel Thomas Bradley are at the center of a network that has been compromising American operations since before my discharge 18 months ago, but their activities extend far beyond individual misconduct into systematic betrayal of national security interests. The financial records displayed on the secure monitors showed a sophisticated money laundering operation that involved offshore accounts, cryptocurrency transactions, and shell companies designed to obscure the source and destination of payments from Russian intelligence services. Each transaction corresponded to specific operational compromises, creating a paper trail that documented exactly how much American lives were worth to the corrupt officials who had sold them. Attorney General Patricia Stone, who had joined the briefing via secure video link from the Justice Department, studied the financial evidence with the analytical intensity of a prosecutor preparing the largest treason case in American history. Colonel Mitchell, this evidence suggests a conspiracy that extends beyond military personnel into defense contractors and possibly congressional staff members who had access to classified operational information. Are you prepared to testify about these allegations in federal court? The question carried enormous implications for Sarah's future and safety. Testifying against a corruption network with the resources and connections to eliminate witnesses would require protection measures that could last for years, effectively ending any possibility of returning to normal military service or civilian life. But the 16 soldiers she had rescued, and the hundreds of others who had died due to operational compromises, deserved justice regardless of the personal cost. The revelation that hit the room like a physical shockwave came when Dr. Stevens displayed evidence that the corruption network had been planning additional operations designed to eliminate other soldiers who had discovered evidence of their activities. Intelligence intercepts showed that the capture of the 75th Intelligence Squadron had been intended as the first phase of a broader elimination campaign targeting over 40 military personnel across multiple units who had access to evidence of systematic corruption. Senator Margaret Stevens, who chaired the Senate Intelligence Committee, studied the elimination target list with growing horror as she realized that the corruption network had essentially declared war against their own military to protect their criminal activities. Dr. Stevens, this target list includes some of our most experienced and decorated intelligence professionals. How many of these personnel are currently at risk? The answer provided by Dr. Stevens chilled everyone in the room. Senator, our analysis indicates that at least 12 of the targeted personnel have died in what were officially classified as training accidents or operational failures over the past 18 months. The pattern strongly suggests that the elimination campaign has already begun, with Sarah's rescue operation exposing the network before they could complete their planned murders. The scope of the betrayal was staggering, involving not just the theft of classified information but the systematic murder of American military personnel to conceal evidence of treason. Sarah watched senior officials grapple with the reality that their own system had been penetrated so thoroughly that unauthorized operations by discharged personnel had been necessary to prevent additional murders and expose the full extent of institutional corruption. These records show payments totaling over $18 million to American officers over a 4-year period, Senator Stevens observed, her voice reflecting the shock of someone who had spent decades believing in institutional integrity. How did this network operate without detection by internal security systems that are specifically designed to identify exactly this type of foreign intelligence penetration? Dr. Rebecca Stevens, who had been invited to present the intelligence gathered by Prometheus Station, answered the question with evidence that revealed the true sophistication of the corruption network's operational security measures. Senator, the corruption network included officials responsible for internal security oversight, financial auditing, and counterintelligence investigations. They were essentially investigating themselves and ensuring that evidence of their activities never reached appropriate authorities or congressional oversight committees. The presentation continued with evidence showing how corrupt officials had manipulated personnel assignments to place trusted associates in key oversight positions, created false flag operations to discredit potential whistleblowers, and used classified authorities to conduct surveillance against military personnel who might discover evidence of their activities. The network had operated with the sophistication of a professional intelligence service, using official resources to protect their criminal activities while systematically eliminating threats to their operations. CIA Director Chen provided additional context that revealed the international implications of the corruption network's activities. The intelligence leaks documented by Colonel Mitchell and Dr. Stevens have compromised ongoing operations in 12 countries, resulted in the exposure of over 100 foreign intelligence assets who were working with American services, and provided Russian intelligence with technical specifications for cyber warfare systems that represent decades of research and development. The strategic damage assessment prepared by the intelligence community revealed that the corruption network's activities had essentially handed Russian intelligence services a comprehensive understanding of American cyber warfare capabilities, electronic intelligence gathering techniques, and operational procedures that would take years to replace and billions of dollars to redevelop. The betrayal had not just endangered individual soldiers, it had compromised American national security advantages that had been carefully developed over decades of technological innovation. FBI Director Martinez provided evidence of the network's domestic activities, including surveillance operations against congressional staff members, intimidation campaigns against potential whistleblowers, and financial manipulation of defense contractors who had discovered evidence of systematic fraud in procurement processes. Senator Stevens, our investigation indicates that this network was essentially operating a parallel intelligence service designed to protect their criminal activities by eliminating threats and controlling information flow within government agencies. Quote, "The briefing continued for 4 hours as officials processed evidence that fundamentally changed their understanding of recent intelligence failures, operational compromises, and the systematic murder of military personnel who had discovered evidence of corruption." Sarah watched senior leaders grapple with the reality that their oversight mechanisms had been completely subverted by the very people they were supposed to monitor, creating a situation where unauthorized operations had been necessary to protect American lives and expose institutional betrayal. The moment of personal vindication came when Admiral Harrison addressed the fundamental question that had defined Sarah's exile from military service. "Colonel Mitchell, your actions in Belarus prevented a major intelligence disaster and exposed corruption that our official oversight mechanisms should have detected years ago. However, you conducted an unauthorized military operation in foreign territory without official sanction or oversight. How do we reconcile your success with the precedent your actions might establish for other officers who disagree with official policies?" Sarah had anticipated this question during her months of preparation for the rescue operation, understanding that her vindication would depend not just on operational success, but on articulating a principled framework for resistance to institutional corruption. "Admiral, I violated regulations because following regulations would have resulted in the murder of 16 American soldiers by their own command structure. When official channels have been compromised by foreign intelligence services and corrupt officials are using their authority to protect criminal activities, individual officers have a responsibility to act according to the constitutional principles they swore to defend rather than administrative procedures that have been subverted by enemies of the United States. The answer resonated with officials who were realizing that their normal oversight mechanisms had been completely compromised by the corruption network, creating situations where adherence to standard procedures would actually serve foreign intelligence interests rather than American national security. Sarah's unauthorized operation had succeeded precisely because it existed outside channels that corrupt officials could monitor, sabotage, or use to eliminate additional witnesses to their criminal activities. Defense Secretary Rodriguez provided the strategic assessment that would determine how Sarah's actions were officially characterized. Colonel Mitchell's operation represents a textbook example of how military professionals should respond when institutional authority has been compromised by foreign intelligence penetration. Her tactical decisions demonstrated exceptional judgment under circumstances where following normal procedures would have resulted in additional American casualties and the permanent concealment of systematic treason. Senator Stevens announced the first of several decisions that would transform Sarah's status and future within the military establishment. Colonel Mitchell, based on the evidence you've presented, the testimony provided by the soldiers you rescued, and the strategic value of the intelligence you've gathered, the Senate Intelligence Committee is recommending that your dishonorable discharge be immediately overturned, and that you be restored to full active duty with all charges dismissed, and any negative references expunged from your service record. The words carried more emotional impact than Sarah had expected, representing not just professional vindication, but official recognition that her tactical decisions had been correct under impossible circumstances. For 18 months, she had carried the burden of institutional disgrace, while knowing that her choices had protected American lives and national security interests. To hear official validation of her judgment felt like emerging from a nightmare that had lasted far too long, finally receiving acknowledgement that her sacrifice had been both necessary and honorable. Congressional Representative Walsh provided additional recognition that addressed the broader implications of Sarah's sacrifice for military personnel who faced similar ethical dilemmas. Colonel Mitchell, your willingness to accept personal destruction rather than participate in institutional corruption exemplifies the highest traditions of military service. Your actions have demonstrated that individual integrity can triumph over systematic betrayal when military professionals have the courage to choose principle over career advancement. The recognition extended beyond personal vindication to include the independent intelligence network that had made the rescue operation possible. Dr. Stevens was officially commended for organizing resistance to institutional corruption and providing resources that enabled the exposure of systematic treason. Marcus Torres, Captain Lisa Park, and the other members of Prometheus Station were granted official recognition for their roles in protecting American national security through unauthorized but necessary operations. Furthermore, Admiral Harrison continued, you are hereby promoted to the rank of full colonel and assigned as director of the newly established Intelligence Integrity Division, with responsibility for investigating corruption within military command structures, protecting personnel who report institutional misconduct, and ensuring that the systematic betrayal you've exposed can never again compromise American national security interests. The assignment represented more than professional vindication. It was an opportunity to transform her personal experience of institutional betrayal into comprehensive protection for future generations of intelligence professionals who might face similar ethical dilemmas. Sarah would now have the authority, resources, and congressional backing necessary to prevent other soldiers from experiencing the same abandonment by corrupted leadership that had nearly destroyed her career and cost 16 lives. Dr. Stevens was also officially recognized for her role in exposing the corruption network and organizing resistance to institutional betrayal. Dr. Stevens, your organization will be granted official status as an independent oversight body with congressional funding, statutory authority to investigate intelligence misconduct without interference from potentially compromised command structures, and direct reporting access to congressional intelligence committees that ensures complete independence from military hierarchy. The transformation of Prometheus Station from a shadow organization operating in abandoned hangars into an official government entity with substantial funding and legal authority represented a fundamental change in how intelligence oversight would be conducted. The people who had been forced underground for refusing to participate in corruption would now have an official mandate to prevent, investigate, and prosecute similar betrayals before they could endanger additional American lives. CIA Director Chen announced additional measures designed to prevent the recurrence of systematic corruption within intelligence services. Based on the evidence presented today, the intelligence community is implementing comprehensive reforms, including mandatory financial monitoring for all personnel with access to classified information, regular polygraph examinations focused specifically on foreign intelligence contacts, and independent oversight mechanisms that operate outside normal command structures to prevent the kind of institutional capture that enabled this network's activities. The reforms extended beyond individual monitoring to include systematic changes in how classified operations were planned, authorized, and overseen by officials who could no longer be trusted to police themselves. New procedures would require multiple independent verification sources for operational intelligence, mandatory consultation with independent oversight bodies for high-risk missions, and real-time monitoring of financial transactions by personnel involved in sensitive operations. Over the following weeks, the evidence gathered during Sarah's rescue operation triggered the largest intelligence corruption investigation in American history, involving federal prosecutors, congressional investigators, and international law enforcement agencies coordinating to dismantle a network that had compromised national security across multiple countries. The investigation expanded far beyond the original corruption network to encompass defense contractors, congressional staff members, and intelligence officials in allied countries who had participated in systematic betrayal of shared security interests. General Patricia Donovan was arrested at Dulles International Airport while attempting to board a private flight to Moscow, carrying falsified diplomatic credentials and encrypted communication devices that contained detailed records of her financial relationship with Russian intelligence services. The arrest triggered a massive counterintelligence investigation that revealed the true scope of her betrayal, including the systematic murder of American military personnel who had discovered evidence of her activities. The evidence recovered from Donovan's possession included detailed plans for additional elimination operations, targeting over 60 military personnel across multiple agencies who had access to information about systematic corruption. The plans revealed a level of systematic betrayal that amounted to active warfare against American military institutions by officials who had sworn to protect them. Colonel Thomas Bradley was found dead in his Pentagon office 3 hours before FBI agents arrived to arrest him, having committed suicide rather than face prosecution for treason. His death initially appeared to eliminate a key witness against the corruption network, but investigators discovered that he had left behind comprehensive records documenting his activities and identifying dozens of other participants who had escaped detection by official oversight mechanisms. Bradley's confession, found on his computer after his death, detailed the complete organizational structure of the corruption network, including financial procedures for receiving payments from Russian intelligence services, operational security measures used to conceal their activities from counterintelligence investigations, and specific instructions for eliminating American military personnel who discovered evidence of systematic betrayal. The confession revealed that the corruption network had been responsible for the deaths of over 30 American military personnel over a 4-year period, with murders disguised as training accidents, operational failures, and suicide cases that had never been properly investigated by authorities who were either compromised or deliberately misled about the circumstances surrounding each death. The investigation expanded internationally as Allied intelligence services discovered that their own operations had been compromised by information provided by corrupt American officials. British intelligence services revealed that 3 major operations had been betrayed by intelligence leaks that resulted in the capture and execution of foreign assets who had been working with Western intelligence services for years. German intelligence officials provided evidence that Russian services had used information from corrupt American sources to identify and eliminate intelligence networks across Eastern Europe, resulting in the deaths of dozens of people who had risked their lives to provide information about Russian military activities and political intentions. French counterintelligence agencies contributed evidence showing that the corruption network had provided Russian services with detailed information about NATO planning processes, military capabilities assessments, and strategic intentions that had been shared during confidential alliance meetings attended by American representatives who had been secretly working for foreign intelligence services. The 16 soldiers from the 75th Intelligence Squadron provided testimony that became the foundation for prosecutions against the surviving members of the corruption network. Staff Sergeant David Chen testified about witnessing Colonel Bradley receiving encrypted communications during classified planning sessions, providing specific dates and circumstances that corroborated financial records showing payments from Russian intelligence accounts. Technical Sergeant Maria Rodriguez described discovering discrepancies in equipment procurement records that indicated systematic diversion of advanced technology to unauthorized recipients, with evidence suggesting that American cyber warfare capabilities were being systematically transferred to Russian intelligence services through official procurement channels. Sergeant First Class Robert Johnson provided testimony about operational security breaches that had enabled enemy forces to predict and counter American intelligence gathering operations, describing specific instances where Russian counter-surveillance measures had been perfectly calibrated to defeat American technical capabilities. The testimony from rescued soldiers provided prosecutors with first-hand accounts of corruption that complemented the financial and communication evidence gathered by Prometheus Station, creating an overwhelming case against the surviving members of the network who had escaped initial arrests by fleeing to countries without extradition treaties with the United States. 6 months after her vindication, Colonel Sarah Mitchell stood in her new office at the Intelligence Integrity Division headquarters in Virginia, a modern facility designed specifically to support investigations of corruption within intelligence services, while maintaining complete independence from potentially compromised military command structures. The building incorporated advanced security measures that protected both classified operations and the safety of personnel who reported institutional misconduct, creating a sanctuary for intelligence professionals who chose principle over institutional loyalty. The walls of her office displayed commendations from the rescued soldiers, letters from grateful family members whose loved ones had been saved by her intervention, recognition from allied intelligence services who had been affected by the corruption network's activities, and photographs from successful operations that had prevented additional betrayals and protected American lives. Each item represented not just professional achievement but personal validation that her sacrifice had been worthwhile and necessary. Her staff included many of the intelligence professionals who had been forced underground by institutional corruption, now working within official channels to investigate and prevent similar betrayals. Dr. Rebecca Stevens served as deputy director, bringing her expertise in intelligence analysis and her network of international contacts to support investigations that extended across multiple countries and agencies. Marcus Torres had been appointed as director of operations, responsible for coordinating complex investigations that required the kind of unconventional approaches that official agencies had been unable or unwilling to employ. Captain Lisa Park led the Protection Division, ensuring the safety of whistleblowers and witnesses whose testimony was essential for prosecuting corruption cases, but whose lives were threatened by networks, with the resources and motivation to eliminate anyone who challenged their activities. The Intelligence Integrity Division had been granted unprecedented authority to investigate any aspect of American intelligence operations, with direct access to financial records, communication systems, and operational files that had previously been protected by classification levels that prevented effective oversight. The division operated with congressional authorization that superseded normal military hierarchy, ensuring that corrupt officials couldn't use their positions to obstruct investigations or protect criminal associates. The impact of their work extended far beyond individual prosecutions to include comprehensive reforms in how intelligence operations were planned, authorized, and monitored by officials who could demonstrate their integrity through regular investigation and verification procedures. New protocols required multiple independent authorization sources for sensitive operations, mandatory consultation with the Intelligence Integrity Division for high-risk missions, and real-time monitoring of financial transactions by all personnel, with access to classified information. The division's first major success involved preventing a planned operation that would have resulted in the deaths of 12 American soldiers in the Pacific Theater, where corrupt officials had been planning to repeat the same tactical approach that had nearly resulted in the murder of the 75th Intelligence Squadron. Intelligence gathered by the division revealed that military planners were coordinating with foreign intelligence services to sabotage their own operations, while eliminating witnesses who might expose additional corruption. Sarah's intervention prevented the operation from proceeding, leading to the arrest of 6 additional corrupt officials and the exposure of a secondary corruption network that had been operating independently of the primary conspiracy exposed through her Belarus rescue operation. The case demonstrated that systematic corruption extended far beyond individual networks into institutional cultures that normalized betrayal and encouraged collaboration with foreign intelligence services. Her phone rang with a call from Staff Sergeant David Chen, who had been promoted and assigned to her new division. "Colonel, We've received reports of suspicious financial activity involving procurement contracts in the Pacific Theater. Looks like we might have found another corruption network that needs investigation. Sarah smiled as she prepared for another mission that would test her commitment to protecting American interests against institutional betrayal. The skills that had made her unemployable in civilian life were now being used to reform the intelligence system from within, ensuring that other soldiers wouldn't face the same betrayal that had nearly destroyed her. "Send me the files, Sergeant. Time to get back to work." The mountains of Eastern Europe had tested her one final time, and she had emerged stronger than ever before. Colonel Sarah Mitchell had been dishonorably discharged for protecting American secrets, only to return as the military's greatest hope for preventing future betrayals. The system had tried to break her, but instead she had fixed the system. The war against corruption was far from over, but for the first time in years, the good guys had someone fighting on their side who understood exactly what they were up against. Sarah had found her purpose not despite her disgrace, but because of it, and that made all the struggle worthwhile. Her soldiers were safe, the traitors were in prison, and the future looked brighter than it had in 18 months. The Intelligence Integrity Division was ready for whatever came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.